Detective Jahi drove slowly into the town of Abiola, the tires crunching softly on the dusty road that led into the small community. The morning sun had barely risen, casting a warm golden glow over the houses and small gardens. Birds chirped in the distance, but the town itself felt quiet, almost too quiet, as if everyone was holding their breath. Jahi had heard the reports late the night before. A baby was missing and the caretaker, Nia, seemed to be acting strangely. He had been assigned to the case immediately, and now he felt the weight of responsibility pressing on him. As he walked through the narrow streets, he noticed neighbors whispering to one another, glancing nervously in his direction. Some mothers clutched their children tightly, while elderly men sat on benches watching him silently. Everyone seemed to know something, yet no one wanted to speak directly. Jahi had seen this before. A small town where news traveled fast, where people spoke in whispers, and where fear mixed with curiosity like a thick fog. He arrived at a modest house at the end of the street. The garden was small but neat, with flowers lining the walkway. The paint on the walls was slightly chipped, showing signs of age, but the home still felt warm and lived in. Jahi paused at the gate, taking a deep breath. Inside, the missing baby's room was just beyond the main hall, and it was his first priority to investigate carefully. The front door opened before he could knock. Nia appeared, her expression calm and composed. She was a young woman, not much older than 25, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. She greeted Jahi politely. "Detective," she said softly, "thank you for coming. I don't know what happened. The baby was fine this morning and then," her voice trailed off. Jahi noticed a slight tremor in her hands, but her eyes remained steady. "I'm here to understand what happened," Jahi replied, keeping his voice calm. "I need to know when you last saw the baby and if you noticed anything unusual today or in the days before." Nia nodded and stepped aside, allowing him to enter the house. The interior was simple but tidy. A small living room led to a kitchen at the back, and the walls were decorated with family photos and colorful paintings. Everything seemed ordinary, yet Jahi had learned long ago that appearances could be deceiving. Even in a house that seemed peaceful, secrets could hide in plain sight. He made his way to the baby's room. The door was closed, and as he opened it, he felt a strange mixture of relief and tension. The room was small but bright, with soft pastel colors on the walls and neatly arranged toys on a low shelf. The crib was empty. A small blanket lay folded neatly as if the baby had just been moved. Jahi examined the room carefully, noting details. A slightly open window, a mobile that swayed gently as if someone had passed by, and a few small footprints in the dust on the floor. "Where was the baby last?" Jahi asked, turning to Nia. "This morning," Nia said quickly. "I fed him, changed him, and put him down for a nap. I checked again an hour later, and he was gone. I don't know how this happened." Her voice rose slightly, but then she took a deep breath and regained her calm composure. Jahi noted the sudden shift. Calmness could be natural or it could be a carefully maintained mask. He walked around the room slowly, examining every detail. There were no signs of forced entry, no overturned furniture, and no broken locks. Everything suggested that the baby had been taken without a struggle, or that someone had left the room as quietly as they entered. Jahi felt a knot tighten in his stomach. A missing baby was always urgent, but the lack of obvious clues made the situation even more mysterious. He decided to speak to the neighbors next. Jahi stepped outside and knocked on the doors of houses nearby. Most people peeked through curtains or opened their doors just slightly. One woman, Adeola, who lived across the street, whispered, "I saw Nia carrying the baby this morning, but she seemed different. Not herself. Something about her eyes, I don't know. She seemed tense, like she was hiding something." Jahi took careful notes. "Did you see anyone else? Anyone suspicious in the street?" Adeola shook her head. "No, just her. But I didn't stay long. Felt strange. I couldn't explain it." He spoke to a few more neighbors, each giving small, often contradictory details. Some said they saw Nia behaving oddly, others insisted she seemed normal. The inconsistencies were typical in situations like this, but they also suggested that Nia's behavior might hold clues. Jahi had learned that in cases involving children, even small details mattered. A glance, a gesture, or a strange routine could reveal more than direct evidence sometimes. Back at the house, Jahi spoke privately with Nia again. "I need you to tell me everything," he said gently. "No detail is too small, no routine too unimportant. Anything unusual you noticed, anything out of the ordinary." Nia hesitated for a moment, biting her lip. Then she began to speak, describing the baby's morning, the feeding, the nap, and her own actions. She mentioned small routines like checking the door twice, making sure the baby's blanket was smooth and placing toys in a certain order. She described herself as meticulous, wanting to ensure the baby's comfort and safety. Yet, Jahi noticed that she paused occasionally, her eyes flicking toward the crib as if recalling something she didn't fully want to share. "Did anyone visit today?" Jahi asked. "No," Nia said firmly. "No one. Only me and the baby." Her calmness was steady, but Jahi noted a flicker of nervousness. It was subtle, a small hesitation in her voice, but it was there. He did not yet know if it was fear, guilt, or simple anxiety from the situation. He decided to check the surrounding area. The garden, the street, and nearby alleyways might hold evidence. As he walked, he observed footprints in the soft soil, tire tracks from a small bicycle, and signs of someone moving quickly through the area. Nothing directly implicated anyone yet, but the patterns were important. Someone had left the scene in a hurry, and Jahi needed to determine who it could have been. Returning to the house, he examined Nia more carefully. She was standing near the window looking out as if waiting for someone. Her hands were steady now, but her eyes betrayed worry. Jahi knew that people often acted differently under pressure, and he needed to watch carefully. How someone behaved in the first hours of an incident often revealed more than interviews later. He asked Nia about her past experience caring for children. She spoke of previous babysitting jobs, her love for children, and her commitment to their well-being. She seemed sincere, yet the situation was puzzling. Everything suggested that the baby had been safe under her care, yet the disappearance was real. Jahi had to reconcile the apparent calmness and competence of the caretaker with the fact that the baby was missing. Hours passed, and Jahi continued to gather details. He interviewed local shopkeepers, checked nearby parks, and asked about anyone who might have been acting strangely. Small hints emerged. Someone had been seen near the house earlier than usual, a car parked at the end of the street had left suddenly, and there were whispers about unusual nighttime visits to the area. These clues were scattered and incomplete, but Jahi knew that patience and careful observation would bring the truth into focus. By late afternoon, Jahi returned to the house and spoke again with Nia. "You've been honest with me," he said gently. "I need you to remember any small detail. Anything that felt different or unusual." She thought carefully, then mentioned that a small doll had been moved from the crib to a shelf without her remembering doing it. She had assumed she had placed it there, but now she recalled feeling uneasy that morning, a sense that something was slightly off. Jahi noted the detail carefully. Even the smallest actions could provide insight into the sequence of events leading to the baby's disappearance. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the quiet town, Jahi realized that the first part of the investigation had yielded important clues. The caretaker's calm but slightly uneasy behavior, neighbors' observations of unusual actions, and small signs in the house and surrounding area. None of it provided a complete answer yet, but it was enough to begin piecing together the story. Jahi set up a temporary observation post near the house, planning to watch the area overnight. He knew that whoever had taken the baby might return, or that additional clues would appear under the cover of darkness. The town was quiet now, but that calm could be misleading. In Abiola, secrets could hide behind the most ordinary appearances. He looked at Nia one last time for the day. She sat quietly in the living room, her hands folded in her lap, staring at the baby's empty crib. Her face was composed, yet Jahi sensed the tension beneath it. The situation was delicate. The baby's safety was paramount, but understanding Nia's actions and the events leading to the disappearance required patience, observation, and careful analysis. As night fell, the streets of Abiola were calm and silent. Jahi remained alert, knowing that the first hours of any investigation were crucial. Tomorrow he would continue interviews, check surrounding areas more thoroughly, and begin to understand the full story. The calm caretaker, the concerned mother, and the whispers of the neighbors were all pieces of the puzzle that would slowly reveal the truth. For now, Detective Jahi waited, aware that in a quiet town like Abiola, the most ordinary-looking people could be hiding secrets, and even small clues could lead to the answers everyone desperately sought. Detective Kalechi returned to the small house in Abiola, determined to investigate the baby's room more thoroughly. The sun had barely climbed above the rooftops, casting soft light across the quiet streets. The town itself seemed to hold its breath, the earlier whispers now replaced by a tense silence. Kalechi had already spoken to the neighbors, noting their observations and suspicions, but the room itself might hold clues that no one else had noticed. Every detail mattered, and he knew that even the smallest signs could lead him closer to the truth. As he stepped inside, he was greeted by Imani, the baby's mother. Her face was pale, worry etched into her features, and her hands trembled slightly as she led him to the room. "Kelechi," she said softly, "please, be careful. I just want my baby safe. Saad has always been loving, I swear. She wouldn't do anything to harm him." Her voice was desperate, full of fear and pleading, yet there was also a faint note of uncertainty. Kelechi nodded, understanding the delicate balance of his investigation. He had to remain objective while observing every detail carefully. The baby's room was small but bright, painted in soft shades of yellow and green. Toys were scattered across the floor, some neatly arranged on shelves, others lying in small piles near the crib. Kelechi moved slowly, examining each corner. One detail immediately caught his attention. Several toys had fine, shallow scratches on their surfaces, as if something had scraped against them repeatedly. They were too deliberate to be accidents, yet there was no obvious explanation. He crouched to inspect the crib. The bedding was clean and well kept, but a small diary lay slightly tucked under the blanket. Kelechi picked it up gently, flipping through the pages. The handwriting was neat, almost meticulous, yet the contents were strange. Saad had written about the baby's daily schedule in unusual detail, noting exact times for feeding, napping, and play. She also included specific instructions for movements, positions, and small habits she believed were important. Kelechi realized that the diary was not just a record. It was an obsession with controlling every aspect of the child's routine. He noted some of the entries that seemed particularly unusual. Saad had described certain special routines, rituals that she claimed helped the baby's development. Some involved rearranging toys in a precise order, checking the crib multiple times, and monitoring the baby's sleep in ways that went beyond normal caregiving. Kelechi frowned. The diary did not show malice or cruelty, but it did suggest that Saad had a very intense, possibly obsessive, way of caring for the child. Imani watched quietly from the doorway, wringing her hands nervously. "She has always been careful," she said softly. "I know it looks strange, but Saad loves my baby. She has never hurt him. I don't understand why everyone thinks she might be involved." Her voice wavered, revealing the tension she had been carrying since the baby went missing. Kelechi nodded, taking her words into account while remaining cautious. He turned his attention to the small scratches on the toys. Some were on wooden blocks, others on plastic animals. Kelechi inspected them closely, noting their depth and direction. They suggested repeated, deliberate contact, as if someone had been frustrated, nervous, or trying to achieve a precise result. But there was no sign of aggression. Kelechi concluded that the scratches were likely part of Sada's meticulous routines, actions done with intense focus rather than anger. Next, he examined the room for anything else unusual. He noticed that several items were misplaced. A small rattle was under the crib instead of on the shelf, a stuffed animal lay on the floor despite the usual arrangement, and one of the baby's blankets was folded differently from how Imani usually kept it. Kelechi asked Imani if she had seen these items moved recently. I don't know," Imani admitted. "Saad sometimes rearranges things. She says it's part of the baby's special routine, but I didn't think much of it. Everything seemed fine." Her voice was hesitant. Kelechi made a note that these small irregularities could be part of Sada's obsessive routines, or they could indicate a deeper problem. Either way, they were worth documenting. He returned to the diary and began reading more entries. Ade had written about conversations she had overheard in the neighborhood, noting which neighbors were friendly, which were distant, and which she believed might influence the baby's well-being. She had also described her own feelings, confessing that she sometimes worried she was not doing enough to protect him. Kelechi realized that Sada's actions, while unusual, were rooted in a strong desire to care for the child, albeit in a way that others might find strange or concerning. A few entries stood out. Saad mentioned waking early in the morning to check the crib, moving toys to ensure they were in the correct positions, and repeatedly monitoring the baby's sleep. She also wrote about talking to the baby in soft tones, singing quietly, and gently correcting his posture when he slept. These entries reinforced the idea that her intentions were protective, though her methods were obsessive. Kelechi understood why neighbors might misinterpret her behavior, especially if they saw only brief glimpses of her actions. He then examined the window near the crib. It was slightly open and sunlight streamed in, illuminating the room in a warm glow. Kelechi noted the latch carefully. There were no signs of forced entry, no scratches or marks on the sill that would suggest someone had entered or exited through it. Whoever had taken the baby, or whoever had been suspected, had not used the window. This further suggested that the room's unusual signs were internal, likely connected to Saad herself. Kelechi also noticed faint fingerprints on the dresser and shelves, though they were not unusual, they matched Saada's and Imani's sizes. Nothing indicated that an outsider had tampered with the room. He carefully photographed everything, making sure to document the diary, scratches, misplaced items and other small signs. These would be important later, both to understand Saada's behavior and to clarify the circumstances of the baby's disappearance. As he worked, Kelechi reflected on the complexity of the situation. Saada's behavior was strange but not clearly malicious. The diary, the unusual routines, and the small scratches suggested an obsessive, controlling style of caregiving. Yet the baby was missing and someone had to explain how that happened. Kelechi knew that understanding Saada's mindset would be crucial to solving the case. He decided to speak with neighbors again, focusing on those who had seen Saad interacting with the baby. A man named Oba, who lived 2 houses down, mentioned that he had seen Saad moving toys repeatedly in the morning. She seemed very careful, Oba said. Like she wanted everything perfect. I thought it was strange, but she wasn't harming the baby. She just moved things over and over. Another neighbor, Leke, said he had overheard Saad talking softly to the baby in the evening, explaining small routines and corrections. She spoke gently, Leke said. But it was intense. Like she was obsessed with doing everything right. I didn't think she was dangerous, just careful in a way that made people uneasy. Kelechi took careful notes. The evidence was beginning to form a clearer picture. Saad was intensely focused on the baby's care, with unusual routines and obsessive habits. She had not been seen harming the baby, and neighbors generally described her as gentle, though meticulous and slightly eccentric. Yet the baby was still missing, leaving the central mystery unresolved. Returning to the house, Kelechi spoke with Imani again. I know Saad seems strange to some people, he said gently, but her intentions appear protective. That said, we need to understand what happened to your baby. Do you remember anyone coming to the house recently? Any deliveries, visitors, or unusual sounds? Imani shook her head. No, nothing unusual. Only Saad and me were here most of the time. I don't know how this could have happened. Her eyes were filled with worry, but also trust in Kelechi's ability to find answers. Kelechi nodded and decided to investigate the surrounding area more thoroughly. He walked around the house, checking gardens, alleyways, and nearby streets for additional clues. He noticed faint tracks in the soft soil near the back gate, but they were too small to identify clearly. There were no signs of forced entry, supporting the idea that the baby had not been taken by an outside intruder, or if so, they had done so extremely quietly. By late afternoon, Kelechi returned to the house and reviewed all the evidence. The scratches, the diary, the unusual routines, and neighbor observations painted a consistent picture of a caretaker who was obsessive but loving. However, the baby's disappearance remained unexplained. Kelechi knew that the next steps would require careful questioning of Saad herself, as well as a review of any possible external factors that could have contributed. He spoke again with Imani. We're going to find your baby, he promised. Right now, the clues suggest that Saada's behavior was strange but protective. That doesn't mean she's responsible for the disappearance. We'll get to the bottom of this together. Imani nodded, relief and anxiety mingling in her expression. She trusted Kelechi and for the first time in hours, felt a small measure of hope. As the sun set over Abiola, casting long shadows across the quiet town, Kelechi prepared for the next phase of the investigation. He would need to speak with Saad directly, review her actions more closely, and continue collecting information from neighbors and anyone who had interacted with the household. The strange clues in the baby's room were not evidence of harm, but they were important. They hinted at the caretaker's obsessive tendencies, which could help explain the unfolding mystery. That night, Kelechi stayed at a nearby inn reviewing his notes and photographs. The scratches, the diary, the misplaced toys, and the unusual routines all pointed toward Saada's intense style of caregiving. Yet the baby's absence remained unexplained. Kelechi understood that solving this case would require patience, observation, and careful questioning. The small town of Abiola held its breath, waiting for answers, while Detective Kelechi prepared for the critical next steps. Detective Jahi returned to the small house in Abiola with a clear plan. He had already inspected the baby's room and spoken with neighbors, noting the unusual routines and obsessive behaviors that Nia displayed. Now he needed to understand her past. He needed to know whether this was an isolated incident or if there was a pattern of unusual behavior that could help explain what had happened. He began by asking Imani to show him any records or documents Nia had left behind. Imani hesitated, her worry evident. I don't know what you might find, she said quietly. Nia has always seemed devoted to my baby, but some things have always seemed strange. I didn't think they were important before. Jahi nodded, reassuring her. Anything could be important. Small details can tell a big story. Imani led Jahi to a small closet at the back of the house. Inside were some of Nia's belongings, clothes, a few personal items, and a small locked box. Jahi carefully opened it and found a leather-bound journal, worn at the edges. He held it gently, feeling the weight of the pages. This journal might hold the answers he needed. He opened the first page and found neatly written notes. At first they appeared harmless. Daily routines, lists of tasks, reminders about feeding and playtime. But as he read further, he noticed that the entries became more detailed, more precise, and sometimes almost obsessive. Nia recorded exact times for waking the baby, the order of toys, how the blankets were arranged, and even the way she moved around the room while monitoring him. Jahi paused, thinking carefully. He had seen obsessive behaviors before, and while they did not always indicate harm, they could sometimes lead to situations where accidents occurred or misunderstandings arose. He continued reading, taking careful notes. One entry stood out. Nia had written about a small ritual she performed every morning. She described waking before the baby, checking the crib 3 times, moving the toys in a particular pattern, and whispering instructions to the baby to ensure he would have a perfect day. She believed that these routines protected the baby, though she admitted that others might not understand. Another entry described how she monitored the baby's breathing while he slept, adjusting his position carefully to ensure nothing would go wrong. She also wrote about speaking to him in soft tones, guiding him through imaginary exercises she believed would strengthen his body and mind. Jahi read each word carefully, noting the intensity of her focus. It became clear that Nia's behavior was rooted in her desire to protect the baby. She had a strong sense of responsibility, almost like a mission. Yet, the intensity of her routines was unusual, even for someone devoted to childcare. Jahi realized that this could explain why neighbors had noticed strange behaviors. Moving toys repeatedly, speaking in whispers, checking the crib constantly, these actions were not harmful but could easily be misunderstood. He flipped through more pages. Nia had documented her past experiences caring for other children. She had worked for several families in the past, each time noting small routines, habits, and ways she tried to ensure the child's safety. Some families had praised her for her attentiveness, while others had found her behavior too controlling. Jahi noted that there was a pattern. She had always believed that her careful monitoring was necessary to prevent accidents or problems. One section of the journal described a previous family. Nia had written about a child who was sometimes difficult to manage, and she had implemented strict routines to maintain order. She mentioned that she had been accused of being too controlling but insisted that she had only wanted to protect the child. Jahi saw a clear pattern forming. Nia's actions were consistent. She had a strong desire to protect, sometimes expressed in obsessive ways, but without intent to harm. Another entry described how Nia observed parents and neighbors, noting small details about their behavior. She wrote about how some people she met did not take childcare seriously, and she worried that if she did not intervene, the children could be at risk. These entries suggested that Nia had a heightened sense of responsibility, almost like a self-appointed guardian, which could explain why she followed strict routines for the baby in Imani's care. Jahi also noticed that Nia wrote about her own feelings extensively. She often expressed worry, fear, and guilt, even when no harm had occurred. She was intensely self-critical, believing that any small mistake could endanger the child. This level of anxiety, combined with her routines, could make her behavior appear strange to outsiders, even when her intentions were pure. He carefully documented everything, making detailed notes and photographing key pages of the journal. He understood that this evidence was important not to accuse Nia but to explain her actions and provide context. If the baby's disappearance involved confusion or misunderstanding, this journal could clarify what had been happening in the household. Kelechi also found sketches and diagrams in the journal. Nia had drawn layouts of the baby's room, showing exactly where each toy should go, how the crib should be positioned, and even paths she walked while monitoring him. She described each action in detail, almost like a map of her caregiving routines. Jahi was struck by the precision and intensity of these notes. It was clear that she had a methodical mind, focused entirely on the baby's safety. He decided to speak with neighbors again, focusing on those who had interacted with Nia during her previous childcare jobs. One woman, Halima, recalled that Nia had cared for her niece for several months. She described Nia as very serious about routines, sometimes too serious, but the child was always safe. Another neighbor mentioned that Nia often stayed longer than necessary, checking on children late into the night, making sure everything was perfect. Kelechi began to piece together a fuller picture. Nia's obsessive routines were consistent across different households, and while they might appear unusual, they were rooted in care and concern. Her intentions were protective, not harmful. This understanding was crucial, as it suggested that the baby's disappearance might not be a result of deliberate malice but could involve miscommunication, accident, or another factor entirely. He also considered Nia's psychological state. The journal revealed intense worry, meticulous planning, and high self-expectations. She seemed to feel personally responsible for the child's safety at all times, even when she had no reason to believe there was immediate danger. This level of focus could explain why she had been described as strange by neighbors, but it also highlighted her devotion. Later that afternoon, Kelechi returned to the baby's room, revisiting the scratches on toys and the misplaced items. He compared them to the routines described in Nia's journal. The pieces fit together. The scratches likely came from repetitive movements during her careful handling of toys. The misplaced items could have been small adjustments in her routines. Nothing suggested intentional harm. He also noted the special routines described in the diary. Nia's obsession with arranging toys, checking the crib, and monitoring the baby's breathing were all consistent with her past behavior. These actions were unusual, but they were not malicious. Kelechi understood that outsiders could misinterpret such meticulous care as strange or suspicious, especially when they did not know the full context. Kelechi then spoke directly with Nia. He approached her calmly, showing respect and understanding. "I've read your journal," he said gently. "It explains a lot about your routines and your intentions. You are clearly very devoted to the baby, and your actions come from care and concern. Can you tell me if anything unusual happened recently? Anything out of the ordinary that you noticed?" Nia's eyes softened. "Detective, I always try to protect him. I do everything to make sure he is safe. I don't know why he is missing. I followed all my routines today. I watched him carefully. I don't understand." Her voice trembled, revealing genuine worry. Kelechi listened patiently, understanding that her obsessive routines did not explain the baby's disappearance but provided essential context for her behavior. He decided to interview previous families she had worked for. They all described similar behavior: strict routines, careful observation, intense attention to detail. None reported harm or abuse. Some had initially found her behavior unusual but later appreciated her dedication. This reinforced the pattern. Nia was obsessive but loving, meticulous but protective. Kelechi compiled all the evidence from the journal, the neighbors, and previous families. The picture was clear. Nia's behavior was consistent, obsessive, and unusual, but always rooted in care. The baby's disappearance remained a mystery, but now he understood the caretaker's mindset. This knowledge would help guide further investigation, as he could now separate unusual behavior from harmful intent. That evening, Kelechi sat quietly in the house, reviewing his notes. The diary and the journal had provided insight into Nia's obsessive routines and her protective mindset. The scratches on toys, the misplaced items, and the special routines were explained. What remained unexplained was the baby's current location. He knew that the next steps would require careful questioning, observation, and checking for external factors that could have contributed to the disappearance. Imani watched him from across the room. "Do you think she could have taken him?" she asked softly. Kelechi shook his head. "From what I've learned, Nia's routines and behavior show care, not malice. She has been meticulous in her duties. We need to consider other possibilities, but we now understand her actions and her mindset better. This helps us move forward safely." As night fell over Abiola, the town seemed peaceful once more, though the mystery remained unsolved. Kelechi reflected on the importance of understanding human behavior. Nia's obsessive care could have been misinterpreted by anyone, but it was rooted in protection. The baby's absence still needed answers, but now he had a clear framework to continue the investigation. He set up a plan for the following day: to monitor Nia's routines, review the baby's environment again, and check with neighbors for any unusual movements or sounds. The journal had provided clarity about her intentions, but the mystery of the missing child remained. Kelechi knew that patience, observation, and careful questioning would reveal the truth. By the end of the night, Kelechi had formed a deeper understanding of Nia's character. She was obsessive, meticulous, and protective, never harmful. The diary and the hidden journal had explained the strange behaviors that had confused neighbors and raised suspicion. With this knowledge, he was ready to investigate the remaining pieces of the puzzle. The baby's safety and the truth behind the disappearance were still his priority, but he now understood the caretaker's mind. Detective Jahi had spent several days investigating the disappearance of the baby in the small town of Abiola. He had examined the baby's room carefully, collected statements from neighbors, and studied Nia's diary and journal. Everything suggested that Nia's behavior had been obsessive, meticulous, and unusual, but there was little to indicate malice. Despite this, the baby remained missing, and the town was restless with worry and speculation. Jahi knew it was time to speak directly with Nia, to understand her actions fully and clarify what had happened. He arrived at the house early in the morning, the sun just rising over the quiet streets. Birds sang softly in the trees, and the faint sound of children playing in the distance carried a sense of normalcy that sharply contrasted with the tension inside the house. Nia was waiting in the living room, sitting upright with her hands folded neatly in her lap. Her expression was calm, but Jahi could see the trace of worry in her eyes. She had been patient, enduring the suspicion and whispers of the town, and now the confrontation was inevitable. "Good morning, Nia," Jahi said softly. "I've reviewed your journal and the diary you kept about the baby's routines. I want to speak with you openly so we can understand exactly what happened. It's important for everyone, especially the baby." Nia nodded slowly, her gaze fixed on Jahi. "Detective, I don't know how to explain everything," she began, her voice quiet. "I only wanted to help the baby. I followed all the routines, all the schedules, and I watched him carefully. I thought I was protecting him, but I know now that maybe I did things the wrong way." She paused, looking down at her hands. The tremor in her fingers betrayed her anxiety. Jahi sat across from her, his tone gentle but firm. "Nia, it's important that you tell me everything. No detail is too small. I want to understand your actions fully. Were there moments when you felt unsure or when something went wrong?" She hesitated, then slowly spoke. "Sometimes, I felt like I needed to do more. I checked the crib 3 times before every nap, moved the toys in a certain order, and watched him constantly. I wrote everything down because I was afraid I might forget. I thought these routines would help him grow strong and safe. But I realize now that I may have gone too far." Jahi nodded, carefully noting her words. "Did you take any actions that could have put the baby at risk?" Nia shook her head quickly. "No, never. I only wanted to help him. I know some things might have seemed strange, moving toys, checking the blankets, even speaking to him in special ways, but I was always careful. The baby was never in danger." Her voice grew more confident as she spoke, though traces of guilt still lingered. Jahi could see that Nia genuinely believed she had been acting for the baby's benefit. Her routines, obsessive as they were, had been rooted in care rather than harm. He also realized that much of the town's fear had come from misunderstanding her behavior. People had seen her meticulous habits without understanding the intentions behind them, and assumptions had quickly turned into suspicion. He decided to walk through the baby's morning routine with her. "Show me how you usually cared for him," Jahi said gently. Nia led him to the nursery, explaining each step. She showed how she arranged the toys, folded the blankets, and monitored the crib. She described her morning rituals in detail, speaking softly but confidently. Jahi observed closely, noting that while her routines were unusual, they were performed with care and attentiveness. There was no indication of harm, no reckless behavior, only extreme vigilance. As they walked through the steps, Jahi asked questions, clarifying small details. "Why do you move the toys in a specific order?" he asked. "Because I believe it helps him recognize patterns," Nia explained. "It's a way to guide him, to teach him something small every day. I know it seems odd, but it has always been my way of helping." "And the checks of the crib?" Jahi asked. "I do it because I want to be sure he is safe," Nia replied. "I watch him breathe, make sure the blankets are in place, and check that nothing could harm him. I thought it was necessary. But I see now that it might have seemed strange to others." Jahi nodded, realizing that the mystery was becoming clearer. Nia's actions had been protective, not harmful. The unusual behaviors and meticulous routines had caused confusion and fear among neighbors, but they were not evidence of wrongdoing. The next question, however, remained. Where had the baby been during the hours of concern? He asked Nia directly. "During the day, where was the baby when you were not watching him?" She paused, considering her words carefully. "I never left him alone. When I needed to step away, I placed him safely in the crib or under the watch of a trusted family member. I always made sure he was protected." He could not have been in danger while I was responsible. Jahi listened carefully, noting her precise wording. There were no indications of negligence. Her obsessive routines might have seemed extreme, but they were consistent with someone who had an intense sense of responsibility for the child's well-being. He then asked about the strange signs in the room, the scratches on toys, the misplaced items, and the diary entries about special routines. Nia explained each one in detail. The scratches came from repeated movements as she carefully arranged toys, the misplaced items were part of her efforts to maintain order, and the diary was simply a record of her actions and thoughts. She admitted that she had not intended to worry anyone, but her methods had been unusual. Jahi could see that the pieces fit together. Nia had been acting in what she believed was the baby's best interest. The confusion, the whispers of the neighbors, and the concern from the parents had all stemmed from misunderstanding her behavior. While her obsessive tendencies had raised alarm, there was no evidence of harm. The baby had been safe all along. He asked one final question. Is there anything you wish you could change about your actions? Nia took a deep breath. Yes. I wish I could have communicated better. I wish I had explained my routines to Imani and the neighbors. I never wanted anyone to worry. I only wanted to protect him, to care for him, to make sure he was safe and happy. I see now that my methods may have been confusing or alarming, but I never intended harm. Jahi nodded, feeling a sense of relief. The confrontation had clarified everything. Nia's intentions had been protective, not dangerous. The baby was safe and the misunderstanding could now be resolved. He called Imani to the room and explained what he had learned. Your caretaker, Nia, has been obsessive in her routines, but all of her actions have been protective. She has been caring for your baby with great attention. The unusual signs you've noticed are part of her methods, not evidence of harm. The baby is safe. Imani's face softened, tears of relief forming in her eyes. Thank you, detective. I didn't understand her actions before, but now I see. She only wanted to help my baby. Jahi smiled gently. Sometimes people's intentions are hidden behind unusual behaviors. Nia meant well and her methods, though unconventional, were meant to protect the child. The situation was complicated, but now it is clear. Everyone can feel relieved. Word of the revelation quickly spread through the small town. Neighbors who had whispered suspicions now realized that Nia's strange routines were not dangerous but rooted in devotion. People who had been concerned about the baby breathed a collective sigh of relief. The tension that had gripped Abiola for days began to ease, replaced by a quiet sense of reassurance. Jahi stayed a little longer in the house to ensure everything was settled. He observed Nia interacting with the baby, noting her gentle tone, careful movements, and attentive monitoring. Every action reinforced what he had discovered. The baby had been safe and Nia's routines, though unusual, were protective. Later that evening, as the sun set over the town, casting warm orange and pink hues across the streets, Jahi reflected on the case. The confrontation had been critical in understanding the truth. Misunderstanding and fear had caused unnecessary concern, but careful observation, direct questioning, and examination of evidence had revealed the reality. The baby had been cared for with devotion and no harm had been done. Imani held her baby close, watching Nia help gently adjust the blankets and toys. I see now, she whispered. She was only trying to protect him. Jahi nodded silently. The situation had been resolved, but it also carried a lesson. People's intentions could be misunderstood and appearances could deceive. By observing carefully, asking questions, and understanding context, the truth could be uncovered, and misunderstandings could be corrected. The baby slept peacefully in his crib, safe and sound. Nia, though still meticulous, relaxed slightly now that her intentions had been understood. And the town of Abiola, once tense and full of whispers, returned slowly to calm. The confrontation had brought clarity, relief, and a renewed sense of trust. Detective Jahi left the house that evening, satisfied. The baby was safe, the caretaker's intentions had been explained, and the misunderstanding that had caused concern throughout the town had been resolved. The people of Abiola could finally breathe again, and life began to return to normal. Fola stood at the doorway with the baby in her arms, feeling a calm she had not felt in many days. She looked at Detective Jahi with grateful eyes and thanked him for his patience, his care, and his steady work. She said that without his calm questions and careful listening, fear would have ruled the house for much longer. Jahi nodded and told her that the truth often takes time, but it always matters. The baby slept softly, breathing slow and even, unaware of the worry that had surrounded him. Fola held him close and felt relief move through her body like warm air. She remembered the nights when she could not sleep, when every small sound felt loud, and when every shadow felt heavy. Now those nights felt far away, even though only a short time had passed. Nia stood a few steps away, quiet and still. Her face showed mixed feelings. There was relief that the baby was safe and that the truth was known, but there was also sadness. She understood now that her ways, though meant to help, had caused fear and confusion. She looked at the floor and took a slow breath, accepting what needed to happen next. Jahi spoke clearly and kindly. He explained that Nia would be removed from her duties as a caretaker for now. He said this was not a punishment, but a step to protect everyone involved. He also said that Nia would be offered help to understand her habits and fears better. Support and guidance would help her learn safer and clearer ways to care for children in the future. Nia listened without protest. She agreed that she needed help and guidance. She said she never wanted to cause fear or pain. She only wanted to protect the baby in the best way she knew. Her voice was soft and her words were simple, but they carried honesty. Jahi believed her, and so did Fola. Fola spoke gently to Nia. She said she was thankful for the care Nia had given and for the love she had shown. She also said that trust needed clear actions and open words. Both women understood that care without balance could lead to harm, even when harm was not intended. News of the outcome spread through the town of Abiola. People who had whispered before now spoke openly. Some felt shame for judging too quickly. Others felt relief that the baby was safe and that no dark act had taken place. The town slowly returned to its normal rhythm, with children playing and neighbors greeting one another again. Elders spoke about the lesson the town had learned. They said that strange actions do not always come from bad hearts. Sometimes they come from fear, worry, or deep concern. They reminded everyone that understanding should come before judgment, and that questions should come before blame. Jahi prepared to leave the town. Before he did, he walked through the quiet streets one last time. He saw doors open, heard laughter, and felt the tension fade. He knew this case would stay with him, not because of danger but because of what it taught about people and perception. Fola watched him go and felt thankful. She promised herself to be more watchful, to ask questions, and to speak up when something felt unclear. She learned that vigilance did not mean fear but awareness. It meant being present, listening closely, and trusting both instinct and reason. Nia left the house later that day. She carried only a small bag and many thoughts. She felt nervous about the future but also hopeful. She knew that with help she could learn better ways to care and to express her concern without causing alarm. That evening, Fola placed the baby gently in his crib. She watched him sleep and smiled. The house felt peaceful again. The air felt lighter. The fear that once filled the rooms was gone, replaced by calm and quiet trust. The town of Abiola settled into the night. Lights dimmed, voices softened, and stars appeared above. What had once been a source of worry had become a lesson shared by all. Sometimes the truth is simple. Sometimes strange actions are not acts of harm, but signs of misunderstanding. Life moved forward, steady and calm. The baby was safe. The family was wiser. The town was gentler. And Detective Jahi carried the lesson with him, knowing it would guide him in every case that followed. The night remained quiet and gentle, and people rested with calm thoughts and steady hearts. The night remained quiet and gentle, and people rested with calm thoughts and steady hearts. The night remained quiet and gentle, and people rested with calm thoughts and steady hearts. The night remained quiet and gentle, and people rested with calm thoughts and steady hearts. The night remained quiet and gentle, and people rested with calm thoughts and steady hearts. The night remained quiet and gentle, and people rested with calm thoughts and steady hearts. The night remained quiet and gentle, and people rested with calm thoughts and steady hearts. The night remained quiet and gentle, and people rested with calm thoughts and steady hearts. The night remained quiet and gentle, and people rested with calm thoughts and steady hearts. The night remained quiet and gentle, and people rested with calm thoughts and steady hearts.